She traded herself for shelter. The scarred rancher gave her home and a future she never expected. Beginning the trade. The storm had been brewing for days, but no one in the fractured frontier colony of Caldera 9 had expected it to tear apart the eastern settlements so violently. Mira Ainsworth, thin, exhausted, and carrying little more than a bundle of worn clothes, had wandered the broken plains when the skies finally cleared. Her people were gone, swallowed by sand, hunger, and the desperation of a world still half terraformed. She had nowhere left to go. On Caldera 9, survival was a commodity more precious than gold, and Mira had none. The markets and Stonecross outposts treated the homeless like vermin, and the labor guilds rejected her. Too frail, too malnourished, and without skills valuable enough for a contract. For 3 nights, she curled up beneath the rusted husks of supply haulers, trying to keep her body from stiffening in the cold desert winds. And then she heard it. They say he's hiring. The scarred one, out by the western canyons. Keeps to himself. Doesn't tolerate thieves, but he's got land, shelter, machines. Myra's heart had stirred at the whispers. She knew who they spoke of. Everyone in the outpost did. Rhett Callan, the war-scarred rancher of the Western Homestead, a man who'd survived the orbital wars, returned half-broken, and carved out a living on one of the harshest stretches of land. Rumors painted him as cold, monstrous, unyielding. Some said he wore a mask to hide the burns across his jaw and neck. Others claimed he'd killed men with his bare hands when they tried to raid his ranch. But one truth stood above all. He had shelter. So Mira made her choice. She gathered her last ounce of courage and walked the long road west, sand crunching under her boots, her stomach hollow, her mind fixed on one desperate thought. Trade where she had left to live another day. When she finally reached the Callan Ranch, the twin suns were dipping low, painting the canyons in rust and fire. Machines hummed in the distance. Hovering irrigation drones, old terraforming units repurposed into cattle herders. The homestead itself was large, weathered but strong, walls of plasteel scarred by storms and raids. And there he stood. Rhett Callan was taller than she expected, broad-shouldered, his long coat frayed from years of hard use. His face bore the stories of rumors hinted at. Scars traced down his jaw, one eye clouded, the other sharp as steel. When she approached, her voice cracked with fear and resolve. "I have nothing left," she said. "No land, no family. But I can work. I can clean, cook 10 machines. I'll trade myself for shelter. If you'll have me." For a long moment, Red only stared. The silence stretched, heavy as the desert night. She thought he'd send her away, that he'd laugh, or worse, turn his back. Instead, his voice came, low and gravelly. "You're off for yourself, as if you're just another piece of salvage," he said. "Why?" "Because salvage still has value," Mira whispered, trembling. "And I need to live." Something flickered in his one good eye, something unreadable. At last, he turned and gestured to the door. "Then come inside. If you're staying, you'll earn your place. But understand this. This is not a charity. You pull your weight or you leave." Relief flooded her. She followed him into the ranch house, unaware that this desperate trade would not only save her life, but bind her future to the scarred man in ways she never imagined. Middle, the ranch and the war within. Life on the Callan Ranch was harsher than Mira could have guessed. Each day began before sunrise. She tended the kitchens, scrubbed the floors, and kept the supply ledgers. Rhett gave her tasks without pity, repairing drone harnesses, cataloging fuel cells, even learning to program the irrigation controls. He spoke little. His words clipped, but he never raised his voice, never struck her, never treated her like less than capable. Still, Mira could feel the weight of his solitude. His house was large, but empty, its walls filled with silence. He rarely ventured to town, rarely spoke of his past. When she dared ask about his scars, his gaze turned distant, locked on memories no one could touch. At night, when she lay on the cot he'd given her in the guest wing, she sometimes wept quietly, certain he couldn't hear. She had traded herself for shelter, yes, but shelter came with chains of silence and ghosts she didn't understand. And yet, something changed over the weeks. She began to see how Rhett's hands, though scarred, were steady and careful. How he repaired the irrigation drones not with bitterness, but with patience. How he stood watch at night, scanning the horizon for raiders, as if he alone bore the responsibility of protecting everything within his walls. She began to see strength, not just scars. One evening, as she served him the stew she'd made from preserved grain and desert herbs. He surprised her by speaking more than a handful of words. "You've been working hard," he said. "Most wouldn't last this long out here. But you keep trying." Mira lowered her gaze, uncertain how to answer. "Because you gave me a chance. No one else would." The silence stretched again, but softer this time. She thought she saw a shadow of a smile touch his lips. From then on, something unspoken passed between them. Small gestures. Rhett showing her how to recalibrate a drone sensor array. Mira leaving an extra portion of stew at a seat. The two of them repairing a broken fence together under the pale moons. It was not affection, not yet, but it was a fragile thread of trust. But Caldera 9 was not kind enough to let peace last. One night, alarms blared across the ranch. Mira jolted awake to see the defense drones activate, lights cutting through the dark. Outside, shadows moved across the plains. Raiders, scavengers drawn by the fertile land Rhett had carved from the desert. He armed himself with a plasma rifle, his scarred face lit by firelight. "Stay inside," he ordered. "Lock the doors. If they breach, you take the emergency passage into the canyon." Fear gripped her, but she shook her head. "No, I can help." "You'll only get yourself killed," he growled. "Then teach me not to." For a moment, his eye burned with the same steel she'd seen that first night. Then, with a reluctant nod, he handed her a small shock pistol. "Stay behind me. Do as I say." The raid was brutal. Plasma fire lit the night, drones whirring and exploding under enemy fire. Mira stayed close, her hands trembling, but when one raider slipped past the defenses, she fired, stunning him before he could reach Rhett's blind side. When the attackers finally fled, leaving behind smoldering wreckage, Myra's heart thundered with both terror and triumph. Rhett turned to her, breathing hard, his scars stark in the moonlight. "You're stronger than you think," he said quietly. And for the first time since she'd lost everything, Mira believed it. Ending. A future neither expected. The weeks that followed the raid changed everything. Rhett began to teach her not only survival, but the craft of the ranch itself. She learned how to operate terraforming equipment, how to manage the bioengineered cattle herds, how to navigate the endless disputes with the outpost traders. Together, they rebuilt the ranch's defenses side by side, wordless at times but never alone. Mira grew stronger, both in body and spirit. The woman who had once begged for shelter now walked the ranch with her chin high, her hands steady. And Rhett, slowly, the walls around his heart began to crack. He spoke more of his past, the battles fought in orbit, the friends lost, the fire that scarred his face and nearly ended his life. He told her how he'd come to the frontier not to escape, but to build something untouched by war. One night, as they stood on the porch watching the twin suns sink, Mira turned to him. "When I came here, I thought I had nothing left," she said softly. "But you gave me more than shelter. You gave me the place. A reason." Rhett's gaze lingered on her, long and searching. His scarred features softened, and his voice, rough as it was, carried a gentleness she hadn't heard before. "You gave yourself that," he said. "I only gave you a chance." Silence stretched between them again, but this time it was warm, filled with possibility. She reached out hesitant, and he let her hand rest against his. It wasn't the kind of love born of fairy tales, nor the desperate trade she had once believed it to be. It was something forged in struggle, trust, and shared survival, something stronger than scars or storms. Years later, when outpost folks spoke of the Callan Ranch, they no longer whispered only of the scarred war veteran. They spoke of the woman who stood beside him, who had traded herself not for chains, but for the chance to build a new life. Together, Rhett and Mira carved out a future no one thought possible. Two broken souls who found not just shelter, but home.